All right, let's dive into some pretty serious stuff happening in the Indo-Pacific.
Yeah.
India's been up to something pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And I think it's time we take a closer look.
Definitely.
They just conducted this kind of secretive missile test.
Right.
And we've got some excerpts here from the Times of India,
Okay.
published just today, November 28th, 2024.
Wow. Hot off the presses.
Yeah, so let's unpack this and see what we can learn about what India's really up to.
What we're seeing here is India really making a statement about their nuclear capabilities.
Uh-huh.
This test, it wasn't just, some routine exercise. This was a launch of a K-4 submarine-launched ballistic missile.
K-4.
Yeah, an SLBM.
Okay.
And get this, they launched it from their brand new nuclear-powered submarine.
Oh, wow.
The INS Arighaat.
INS Arighaat, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Didn't we just hear about the submarine, recently?
You're right on the money. It was just commissioned back in August.
Oh, wow.
So this test that's happening just a few months after it's been deployed, and this is significant because it's actually India's second nuclear-powered submarine that can launch these nuclear missiles.
Okay.
And it's a big step up from their first one, the INS Arighaat.
Okay, so we've got this new advanced submarine, and they're testing out this K-4 missile.
Right.
What's so special about this K-4?
Well, the K-4, it has a range of, get this, 3,500 kilometers.
Whoa.
That's enough to hit targets across a huge chunk of Asia.
Yeah.
But here's what's really important. This is the first time they've actually launched it from a submarine.
Oh, really?
All the other tests before were done from, underwater platforms.
Oh.
But this shows a whole new level of capability.
Wow, so this is like a major milestone for India's nuclear program.
Yeah.
But what does it really mean for their strategic position in the region?
This is where it gets really interesting because, you see, India's been working towards this thing called a nuclear triad, which means they want to be able to launch nukes from land, air, and sea.
Oh, I see.
Now they've already got, strong land-based and air-based capabilities.
Right.
But the submarine part, that's been a bit slower to develop.
Yeah, that makes sense. Submarines are pretty tricky to track down, right?
Exactly. They're like the ultimate deterrent.
Yeah.
Because you can't really take them out in a first strike.
Right.
So this INS Arighaat with those K-4 missiles,
Yeah.
it really strengthens India's nuclear deterrent.
Uh-huh.
It makes any potential adversary think twice,
Right.
because any aggressive move against India would become a whole lot riskier.
So India, they're sending a clear message with this test.
Yeah.
They're not just building submarines for the fun of it, right?
No, right.
They're aiming to become like a major player in this whole nuclear deterrence game.
Absolutely. And this is just the beginning.
Oh, really?
India has some pretty ambitious plans for their submarine fleet.
Okay, let's talk about those plans.
Sure.
What's next for their underwater arsenal?
Well, they're already working on more powerful missiles, the K-5 and K-6.
Okay.
And those are expected to have ranges of, 5,000 to 6,000 kilometers.
Whoa, that's a big jump.
It is a huge leap in capability.
Huh. And are they planning to build more submarines as well?
Yes, actually, they're working on a third, even bigger nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine.
Oh.
It's called the INS Arighaat,
Okay.
and it's going to be commissioned early next year.
Wow.
And it can carry even more missiles, and it has a longer range than the Arighaat-class submarines.
Okay, so more missiles, more submarines, longer ranges.
Yeah.
Seems like they're really going all in on this submarine program.
Yeah.
What's driving this push?
That's the key question.
Is it purely defensive, or is there something else going on?
Well, India's always had this no first use policy for nuclear weapons.
Right.
But we can't just look at their submarine program in isolation.
You mean we need to look at the bigger picture?
Exactly, the geopolitical situation, particularly what's happening with China. China's been rapidly expanding their own navy.
Right.
Especially their submarine fleet.
Yeah.
And that's definitely something India is taking into account, in their strategic planning.
So there's like an arms race going on underwater?
Well, it's not quite that simple.
Okay.
India's submarine program, it's not just about, matching China ship for ship.
Right.
It's about creating a strong deterrent, one that keeps them safe and gives them a voice on the world stage.
That makes sense. A strong submarine force.
Mm-hmm.
It gives India options. Right.
Exactly.
They can project power, further out, and it also discourages any potential aggressor.
Yeah, it makes them think twice.
Makes them think twice, exactly.
It's about having a seat at the table
Yeah.
when decisions are being made that affect the region and even the world.
It's interesting to think about how other countries in the region are viewing this.
Yeah.
I imagine there are mixed reactions.
Oh, absolutely. Some countries, they might see India's growing naval power as a good thing.
Right.
You know, like a counterbalance to China's assertiveness.
Yeah.
They might even want to cooperate more closely with India.
But for others, it could be unsettling.
Right. Some countries might worry about India's ambitions and see this as a threat. They might even try to build up their own militaries in response.
It's like a complicated chess game, isn't it?
Yeah.
Every move affects everything else.
It really is. And the effects of India's submarine program, they go way beyond just the region.
Really? How so?
Well, think about this. India's always been a champion of non-alignment, right?
Yeah, they haven't really picked sides traditionally.
Right, but as their navy grows, they might start partnering more closely with countries like the U.S., Japan, Australia.
Okay.
Countries that are also concerned about China.
So this could change alliances in the Indo-Pacific.
It has the potential to, and it's hard to say what will happen, but India's submarine program is definitely a factor.
Going back to the article, it mentions that India actually issued a public notice about this missile test in advance.
That is interesting.
They didn't even try to hide it, which is kind of unusual, right?
It's not typical for these kinds of tests.
So what do you think they were trying to say by announcing it publicly?
Well, on one hand, it could be seen as transparency.
Okay.
You know, showing that they're being responsible.
Like saying, hey, we're not trying to start anything?
Exactly. But it's also a way of showing their strength. It's like saying, look what we can do.
A calculated move.
It is aimed at both their own people and the rest of the world.
Right. Reassuring their citizens and sending a message to everyone else.
Exactly.
It's amazing how one missile test can tell us so much about a country's strategy and its place in the world.
It shows how military power, political goals, and global politics all connect.
This makes me think about submarine warfare in general.
Yeah.
It seems like a really secretive and high-stakes area.
It is. Submarines, they operate in secrecy, you know, with the potential for massive destruction.
Right.
The stakes are incredibly high, and there's very little room for error.
And it feels like the technology is always changing with new submarines and missiles being developed all the time.
You're absolutely right. The pace of technological development is constant.
Yeah.
It's constantly changing how submarine warfare works.
I bet that keeps policymakers and military strategists up at night.
It does. They're always trying to figure out the threats, you know,
Yeah.
assess the risks and adapt their strategies to maintain a credible deterrent.
It makes you wonder about the future of submarine warfare.
Yeah.
And the role it will play in international relations.
That's an important question and one that deserves a lot of thought.
Definitely.
The development of these underwater weapons, they have huge implications for global security and stability.
Well, before we go too far down that road, let's bring our listeners back into the conversation. We've covered a lot about India's submarine program and this missile test.
Yeah.
So I want to hear from you, our listener.
Yeah.
What do you think all of this means for India's place in the world?
That's a great question.
India's been a rising power for a while.
Right.
But this move, it feels different, more assertive.
It does, doesn't it?
Like it's going to have a big impact on the whole Indo-Pacific region.
Yeah. And even beyond that.
It's like a statement almost,
Uh-huh.
not just about military power,
Right.
but about India's willingness to, step up and be a leader.
I think you're right. It's like they're saying, we're not just going to sit back and watch anymore.
Right.
We're going to shape our own future.
Yeah, and the timing is interesting too.
Yeah.
The world is changing so fast right now.
Definitely old alliances are shifting,
Right.
and there's this whole new power dynamic emerging.
And in that kind of world, nations like India, they see an opportunity.
Yeah, to assert themselves to become a major player.
And this submarine program, it gives them the tools to do that.
Exactly. Those advanced submarines with their long-range missiles, they make a statement.
So here's something for our listener to think about. If this is just the beginning, how will India's growing assertiveness affect things?
Right.
Will it lead to more cooperation or more tension?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
So many factors involved, it's hard to predict.
But one thing's for sure.
With that.
Everyone's going to be watching India very closely.
Oh, yeah. Their actions are going to have consequences for a long time to come.
It's a reminder that we live in a very interconnected world.
Definitely. What happens in one part of the world affects everyone else.
And that's why it's so important to stay informed.
Yes.
And think critically about these issues.
Absolutely. Consider different perspectives. Don't just take one side.
Well, we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought.
Yeah.
The story of India's rise, it's still unfolding.
And it's a fascinating one.
And it's definitely worth keeping an eye on.